Nathaniel Lee. I'd like to thank you for listening to our show each week. I have my superstar guest, attorney Vanita Banks out of Chicago, a cybersecurity expert, master's in tax. And you may join us live by calling the following number, 833-653-3529. That's 833-653-3529. There is just a whole lot of legal matters that are important, that are pending, and but all of them are very important. But today I'm going to start with the most historic legal case we've had in recent memory. That is the upcoming jury trial of the former president of the United States, Donald Trump. Donald Trump jury selection starts on Monday. It is expected to last 1 or 2 weeks to select a jury, and the trial is expected to last 5 to 6 weeks. The jury pool will be hundreds of people. They have to seat 12 jurors and 6 alternates. The judge gave each of the jury 42 questions in order to determine their background and things of that nature. The jurors will not, their identity will not be disclosed because of the publicity and also the action of Donald Trump. They believe that if they disclose the identity of jurors, that they are likely to be bribed, harassed, or harmed. And so that is the jury pool, and that's the security. They're going to be anonymous, and this judge took a week to select 12 jurors and 5 alternate in prior trials. So we think it will be at least 1 week to select a jury. Now, what is this case about? The prosecutors in Manhattan alleged that Donald Trump repeatedly and fraudulently falsified New York business records to conceal criminal conduct that hid damaging information from the voting public during the 2016 presidential election. The case is about a sex scandal that Donald Trump tried to hide, that he had an extramarital affair with Stormy Daniels, who they say was a porn star at the time. And they paid, his attorney, Michael Cohen, paid $130,000 to keep her silent about their sexual encounter. Trump denied the allegation, and the evidence that they have is Donald Trump checks that he wrote to Michael Cohen to pay for the settlement of the matter. Now, that's the start of the case. And what is Trump's defense? His defense is simple. Donald Trump said that he did nothing wrong, and that he acknowledged reimbursing Michael Cohen, but he said he didn't know what he was paying Cohen to do. And they plan to do a full-out attack on their lawyers. But the problem with this case, Counselor, is that all the witnesses in this case that will be testifying against Donald J. Trump are people that was on his payroll, people that he hired, people that work for him at the White House or in private business. So other than Stormy Daniels, who is the person he paid for sexual encounter. So the problem that is this, some pundits in different news stations, well, I shouldn't call them news stations, maybe entertainment station, they're claiming that this is a political prosecution. However, they ignore the fact that not a single witness that's going to be testifying against them on the core things that he did, they're all Republicans. They were Republicans at the time, and they worked for him. Also, David Pecker, who was the CEO of the National Enquirer. By the way, I never buy that junk paper, National Enquirer. They would catch and kill adverse stories. They would paint adverse things against their adversaries. But But in a nutshell, that's what the case is all about. And in a criminal trial, you must have a unanimous verdict of 12 jurors must all say that he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. He faced about 4 years in jail if convicted. And this case is historic in many regards. The first time in American history that we've had a former president indicted and standing trial for felonies. Never happened in American history. But the irony of this is that somehow there's a large segment of the American public who, quote, believe that this is, quote, a witch hunt by a Democrat, not realizing that this so-called witch hunt is being presented, or the evidence that been presented to the jury is from his own employees and former friends and acquaintances. So that's what the case is all about. And there is some compelling evidence that they've been showing that shows that he did exactly what they're alleging. What is evidence? His checks and his statements. And that's where we start. But anyway, Attorney Banks, this historic case, we should have a verdict, barring some unforeseen reason to cease a jury trial. There's a few ways in which a jury trial can be stalled. In this case, the Trump lawyers filed lawsuits against the judge. They filed all kinds of motions to vacate the trial. They went to the appellate court, I think 3 times, all been rejected. So the case should go forward. And usually what stops a trial a lot of time, you have illness, death, or some unforeseen circumstances that warrant a continuation of the trial. Otherwise, it starts Monday, and we should expect a verdict from the trial in about 6 weeks. First question, Attorney Banks, do you think that if he's found guilty, did it affect the polls or chance of being reelected?
I'm not sure, Attorney Lee, and good morning. I've seen some earlier polls that have raised the question as to whether or not there was a conviction on some of these various 91 indictments. And the answer, whether or not a conviction would impact the citizens' vote for the former president. And some polls I've seen, it says that would have no impact at all on their support for the former president. And so I think that those citizens that support the former president, that many of them feel, and as you've seen, believe that these charges in these several cases in several jurisdictions across the country account for nothing more than a witch hunt against the former president. But what is so interesting, as you stated, Attorney Lee, is that no other president in the history of the United States has faced a criminal prosecution. And one of the questions that comes up is whether or not these hush money payments were actually illegal. And we know that his former attorney, Michael Cohen, pled guilty and actually went to prison in 2018. He pled guilty to 2 campaign finance charges. And those consisted of causing an unlawful campaign contribution to be orchestrated, and you mentioned earlier, from AMI to one of the alleged former Trump mistresses, and then also making an excessive campaign contribution for the payment to Stormy Daniels. And then the question came up, did the former president know about these payments? And his attorney, again, in at least one there's at least one recorded conversation that appears to be about the payment, in which they are discussing whether the payment should be made in cash. There's been several attempts to delay this trial, and it is set to begin this Monday, I believe, Attorney Lee, and I'm sure that many people will be closely watching this case.
Well, that's a good overview. And I think that there's some pretty significant evidence to show misconduct. Now, why is this case important? This case represents a third trial process for a former sitting president. The first trial had to do with the fact that he was adjudicated to have sexually assaulted E. Jean Carroll in a department store. So the judge determined that he had raped a woman in a store. And then she sued for defamation and has over $80 or $90 million in jury verdict against him. He denied that. The second case had to do with the fact that he falsified financial statements. The falsification of financial statement affects everybody in America who ever applied for a home or got a simple mortgage or loan. If the average person, I represented a client, a physician, who had made one falsification on a financial statement to acquire a home, he got 42 months for a single count. And it had to do with the fact that he had taken an earlier tax return to show him making a lot more money than the year that he actually applied for a loan. That was the misconduct. So in Trump case, they determined he did that on almost every project. And the irony of this is that he was never charged with those. And so now you have a person who's running for president of the United States, who there's a multitude of jurors and judges have determined that basically he's a fraudster. Terrible thing to do. Let's, Attorney Banks, I mean, in terms of having a person who has such a tainted background to somehow run for the highest office of the United States is a terrible thing to see in American democracy.
It truly is totally outrageous, Attorney Lee. And I wanted to just comment on exactly, what law is the former president accused of breaking in New York. And Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, when the indictment by the grand jury was announced in April of 2023, the former president is accused of falsifying New York business records in order to conceal damaging information and unlawful activity from American voters before the 2016 election. It's my understanding that Stormy Daniels was about to announce, plans for a book and her relationship with the president. And so that's when these alleged hush money payments were made. And the former president is charged with 34 counts of falsifying business records. And that's a Class E felony, Attorney Lee, in New York. And the penalty for, if he's found guilty, he could be sentenced to probation or a maximum sentence of up to 4 years in state prison on each count. But the question, you referenced the paneling of the juror and as you know, in a criminal prosecution, the defendant must be proven to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And I wonder whether at least one juror would support the former president, and at least this trial may result in a hung jury. What do you think, Attorney Lee?
It's always a possibility because he just needs to have one person. However, they do have a few procedural safeguard. That is that they're going to have 6 alternates. And I've had jury trials where a person had strong disagreement, had some adverse reaction, and was kicked off the jury, and the alternate took their place, but that could happen. Let's take one caller real quickly. Caller Imhotep, you had a question or comment for us today, sir. You're on mute.
All right, Brother Nate. Brother Nate?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Brother Nate. All right, Brother Nate and the Attorney Grimes. Attorney Banks. Thanks for taking my call again today. A couple questions I had for you, a couple of legal issues that really disturbed me this week. Custom is my mother, but I always throw it everybody's way to hear. Number one was I don't know if you went through it last week. I don't know if I missed it, but the Arizona ruling going back to 1864. Is that what it goes back to? It wasn't even a state until 1912. So how does that apply if they didn't even have a constitution, and how does that apply? I did read that they gave them 2 weeks to enact that. That's some people don't think that we're going backwards, but that ruling definitely shows we have problems. And number two, I read a case yesterday in the Louisiana Supreme Court ruled against victims of sexual assault against the Catholic diocese and Catholic priests, citing the 14th Amendment of property, due process or property. Anyway, it ruled that they were immune from lawsuits. I thought that was horrible when you read everything and read it down the line. It seems like we have some in the judiciary who have not or don't want to progress to present day logic. Law is supposed to be about logic, and a lot of these rulings, I'm a scientist by trade, so we deal in logic, and a lot of these rulings are illogical, just like you're talking about with Trump and sequestering or potential jurors because they figure they may be threatened or this and the third. What is happening? I mean, we're talking about, I remember John Gotti, Teflon Don, and that was stuff done back then. I can't understand this. This is some of these legal rulings they just blow your mind. And then lastly, everybody that's running for governor, Attorney Banks or Attorney Grimes, if you listen, everybody that's running for governor in the state of Indiana has attached himself to Donald Trump. And we had a ruling yesterday in the House where it was a bill to make the government have to get a warrant before they can spy on American citizens. It was a tie vote. And of course, the Speaker, Mike Johnson, voted against requiring the government to get warrants before spying. I thought that was travesty. That's a harbinger for the Constitution just falling. So I know I threw a bunch out there, but that ruling definitely was horrible. So let's see comments off the air. Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, we're going to cover the Arizona. That's what this topic we're going to cover today also. But one final comment about this Donald Trump case, that is that these trials do have consequences. And so at the end of the trial, a judge from his son will make a determination as to whether or not, if he's found guilty, whether or not he spend time in prison or probation or some other sentence. So we're facing real probability that a person who's running for president of the United States may end up serving some jail time in the year in which they're running for president. But that's a real possibility in this case. Now, Attorney Bank, the second issue had to do with the Arizona Supreme Court decision. It was a 4-2 decision. Now, it was an 1864 law. In 1864, we still had slavery in America. A lot of people realize that. And Arizona only became the 48th state in 1912. And so you have a slavery type law that somehow got resurrected in 2024. It's almost like I was watching some TV and I saw these young folks down in Georgia was talking about the tragedies that happened over in Gaza. And then for a whole week, I watched in horror as state, university, and these people kept removing these DEI programs. So diversity and inclusion program that put a lot of people in a position to go to these institutions of higher education are being eliminated. And it was just shocking to me that that was not a subject matter that these kids in college were concerned about. Instead, we have situations occurring all over the globe. Every country has some drama. You know, there's tragedies everywhere, but they're focused on this one tragedy, and it just didn't resonate with me, Attorney Banks. But this case in Arizona did stick a little bit, because I'm thinking, why is it possible, like the caller said, that if they have a law during slavery time that's enacted, how do they resurrect a law that 140 years old? Didn't make any sense to me.
Absolutely no sense, Attorney Lee. And Arizona needs to immediately repeal this law, which, as you stated, dates back to the Civil War. This is an 1864 law that was passed before Arizona was even a state. And it was passed at a time when women didn't have a right to vote. And before Arizona, as I mentioned, at that time, it was a territory. And so when you look back at the history of this law, it was passed at a time when male physicians, they wanted to dominate healthcare over midwives. And so they came together. This is how my understanding of my reading, that in 1847, a small group of doctors, they came together and they formed the American Medical Association, Attorney Lee, which was largely to stop competition from midwives and other non-licensed providers of healthcare, you know, at the time. So this was behind the scenes. There was a battle of physicians. They wanted to control the market on female healthcare. And obviously, this law needs to be repealed. There was also, at the time, rising birth rates among an influx of Catholic immigrants. And from what I understand, falling birth rates among American-born women. So a lot of history behind this ancient law that needs to be immediately repealed, because, and again, this is the kind of chaos that we're seeing across the country in the aftermath of the Dobbs decision. And certainly Arizona women will continue to, their lives will be threatened as a result of this law. And there are thousands of cases that we're hearing from women across Arizona whose lives again, are being threatened as a result of this draconian law?
Was a terrible, terrible tragedy in American legal system. These women, the abrogation of women's rights is suddenly appearing all over the country, and also the abrogation of African American rights are being also introduced in the form of diversity and inclusion. There's an open attack on diversity type programs, and everybody forgets about the fact that we only had desegregation in busing in the 70s. You know, it wasn't like this process started back in the 50s. Even when the decision came out in 54, in my state, our school became desegregated, not integrated, but desegregated in like 1970, when they bused the African-American students to the white schools. That's 1970. And so we're seeing a return to these draconian laws in the past. And so what that tells you is that it's imperative that you go out and vote now more than ever. So with that, let's go to our call, Pierre Pullins. You have a comments or a question for us today, Pierre?
Oh, good morning, Nate, and good morning, Vanita. Can you hear me well?
Loud and clear.
Okay. Boy, I was really hoping Milton was going to show up today, but I guess he's got something else going on. But maybe we can save this topic for next week. And I was just hoping that maybe next week or so you commit a few minutes to O.J. Simpson, because I really wanted to talk to Milton about what he knew about that case. So we'll do that maybe.
We do too. I was sorry that he couldn't join us today, so I was really wanting to hear his reflections and perspective.
Hey, Pierre, during that trial, we broadcast that back in the 90s. That was a trial that he was our local reporter at the courthouse. So we broadcast the Simpson trial behind the scenes stuff each week for almost a year on our local station, TLC 1310 and 105.7. But we covered that trial on the radio.
Right. I didn't recall the radio, but I watched that trial every day on TV. And I can tell you, I cried when he was acquitted. And I just remember so much about that trial. But I'll save that next week when Milton comes on. But one thing I do want to ask you, attorneys, I want to get your opinion on this. Nate, I'm Team Israel. I'm in the Israelis' corner with this war against Hamas in Gaza. Here's the question I wanted to ask you. All of these people calling Joe Biden Genocide Joe and accusing the United States and Israel of genocide and all of this. Okay. Are they going to be willing to pay reparations to the Palestinians in Gaza? And what about the Palestinian Americans in Detroit who have lost family members? Will they be able to seek reparations payments? Because I think that's where this is going to end up after the war is over. Is the U.S. going to be on the hook for reparations payment? And are we going to be on the hook for a massive Marshall Plan for Gaza, since everybody accused us of genocide and everything? And is the American public willing to pay for that? And I just wanted to put that in you guys' knowledge base and see what you guys thought. And I'll take it off the air.
Well, the problem is that the United States is involved in conflicts all over the world on a daily basis. I watched in horror as I saw young girls in Africa get taken by the Boko Haram. And so we see these tragedies occurring all over the world. And in my opinion, the United States should not be held liable, nor the President of the United States should be held liable for things that occurs in countries all over the world. These are governments in which they elect their leaders. And so in the leaders of countries are Democratic elected leaders, and they're voted into office, and the people in those countries make decisions on leadership. And so the United States have a role in the whole world, but it's not sacrosanct. In other words, they can request that a country do certain things, but other than putting pressure on them, it's one of those situations whereby the United States or the president should not be held liable for the acts of any leader worldwide because of the fact that we assist them by providing weapons.
Nate, your analogy is flawed. Boko Haram and the analogy that you gave, taking the little girls and all of that didn't have anything to do with the U.S. government or anything. We had no hand in that whatsoever.
No, you missed the point. I'm saying that the United States, I thought in that case, should have intervened, but they did not. You know, in this case here, it was an act of terrorism committed. And so we pick winners and losers. In other words, in that case, I thought the president or the United States should have intervened, but they did not. In this particular situation, the United States does not have direct intervention in the war. And, you know,
in the war in Gaza?
We are not,
in the war.
As far as I know, we don't have soldiers involved in the war. We supply.
It's our bombs. We sold them the munitions. It's our bombs.
We sell.
It's our bullets.
But we sell bullets and munitions to a lot of countries. And so I don't think that, in other words, I think that they're putting blame on the United States is misplaced. I think that there's so much that the United States could do, and their sole remedy would be to withhold weapons. But the problem is, I'm not sure there's a political climate to do that.
So political, who cares about the political? If I'm a Palestinian American and I lost 80 members of my family in Gaza because of the U.S. and Israel dropped the bomb on them, and everybody's calling it genocide, and the world court is calling it possible genocide or whatever, I'm going to get me an attorney, and I'm going to try to sue the United States government. Are you saying that that those people were just going to be out of luck?
Okay, let me go to Vanita. Vanita, you have a comment? Go ahead.
Well, when you were talking about other instances, I'm thinking about Haiti right now, you know, and what's happening over there, and how, to your point, Attorney Lee, there's really not much intervention, if you will, happening there. This is a very, very complex topic. And I think that many people may have believed that Israel had a right to defend itself in the aftermath of the October 7th massacre perpetuated by Hamas, a terrorist organization. However, today, we have a humanitarian crisis where innocent people, mostly women and children, and the numbers are devastating, are being killed. We had the food aid workers that were killed a couple weeks ago. And so at this juncture, we have to figure out what next steps to take. And from my perspective, that the steps that the Biden administration are currently articulating, which is that we need an immediate ceasefire at this point, I think that is the direction that should be taken immediately at this juncture because, as the caller was saying, there's a perspective that this is genocide that's occurring. And so we really need to address it. I think the tactics right now are outrageous at this point, from my perspective, and that we really need an immediate ceasefire at this time. I also think that we need to have the ability to discuss this issue and do it in a way that doesn't get people canceled, you know, and we should be able to share our perspectives, regardless of what they might be, on this topic on both sides. But right now, we definitely have a humanitarian crisis that should be addressed immediately from my perspective.
Well, two important issues. Number one, I've never done a case that involved wars between countries, so I can't really give a legal opinion because it's outside the scope of my practice. So I don't have any idea as to how you go about suing people in foreign countries in a matter like this. But here's the point that I think is important. I look at these terrible events that occurs all over the world. One of the places that we see mass killing is in Haiti. You know, we've had, 7,000 or 8,000 people killed in the last year by gangs in Haiti, and people there, some people wanted the United States to intervene to stop the mass killing in that country. We have not. As it relates to that particular war over in Gaza between the Israeli, President Biden has requested there be a ceasefire. And also, at the same time, they must release the hostages. Innocent people were being held, and now we find out that they may all be dead. But the point is that it's a terrible tragedy, but I'm not sure of the legal consequence because it's outside of my practice, Vanita. I don't have a clue whether or not, because our system of justice in America is kind of unique. Our system allows for individuals and companies to be held accountable for misconduct. But the justice system we have in America is not the same system worldwide. Every country can adopt their own system. So I don't have a clue as to how that would work in that country. Okay, we have another caller. Caller, you have a question coming for us today.
Yes. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Renee Shulk, and I'm calling in again. I totally agree with Attorney Vanita, what she said about Gaza and what's going on in Israel. I'm not an attorney, however, I am a human being and I'm a critical thinker. And what's happening in Gaza right now cannot be acceptable to any human being that believes in a person's right to live freely and safely and govern their own bodies and lifestyles. So I'm totally against what is going on with Israel. Hold on, I'm the one with the triplets in my room. Sorry about that. So I am totally against the idea that, and I'm going to put this all on Bibi. Bibi Netanyahu is the one that caused all of this. Yes, Hamas was the weapon that did it, but Bibi has actually, according to the research, has funded Hamas through several other Arab nations and gave them the green light to take over in Palestine or in Gaza to be their official governmental representation when there were other governmental representations that were not anti-Israel or calling for the execution of Jews. And Bibi thought he was in a good place, but what he didn't do as a person who pretends to run a democratic state, but actually is, to me, is a authoritarian. He eliminated a lot of his governmental structure, which gave people the rights, the Israelis, the Jews, the right to vote for who they really wanted in office. So when you got that going on, and then he didn't protect his people. So this is on Bibi just as much as it is on Hamas. And they're not, and this is the other thing, Hamas has never been representation. They are a terrorist organization. And when Bibi raised them to the level of being an equal partner to negotiate on behalf of the Palestinian people in Gaza, he immediately took away any defense he could have had or his people could have had. So I'm going to leave it at this, that Bibi is the reason this is happening. Biden can't control Bibi, and Bibi doesn't want Biden to control him because he knows that once he stops this war, he's probably going to go to jail and he's going to lose his position. He'd rather have Trump in office. So there, and that's what this is all about. And also, I also believe that Bibi is trying to commit genocide because he needs more land for his people because the Jewish people are running out of space in Israel. And so he needs more territory, and he thinks if he levels Gaza, then he can be able to push the settlements further into Gaza. That's my opinion. Thank you for listening.
Vanita, I've not studied that issue, but one of the things that we've glossing over is this attack in our country on diversity and inclusion programs. And what's amazing to me is that this idea with the foreign countries dominating the American airwaves, but we ignored what's happened here at home. It's not just the abortion issue that's troublesome, particularly the African American in our country. It's the fact that we're going in reverse on progress we made through affirmative actions. They've eliminated things like that. Why is it that today that those issues are not front and center with the African American public?
Well, Attorney Lee, they well should be. And our careers have, I like to say that our careers have coincided with the evolution of affirmative action in the workplace. And let's remember that affirmative action was never intended, as the term was ultimately bastardized and the narrative changed by those who strategically desired to benefit from a false presumption that affirmative action meant unqualified individuals gaining employment in the corporate workplace, for example, when in fact affirmative action was intended for qualified individuals who didn't have the opportunity to get in the door to prove themselves to have the opportunity for gainful employment. And so we've seen over a period of about 40 years of beginning with affirmative action and then evolving to diversity and then diversity and inclusion, and now diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I think that, first of all, when we hear these attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to ask specifically, what is the attack on? Are we talking about, so you're not in favor of diversity? And so you're saying that you disagree with equity and that inclusion is a bad thing. We know from statistics, and again, this has evolved in a period of about 40 years, that diverse workplaces have greater and improved decision-making, and that it's not only the right thing to do, it's what's good for business. And if a company wants to win in a global marketplace, then it will value the perspective of diverse employees at that table. The other thing that we saw in 2015 was that was the first year that more minority babies were born in this country than non-minority babies. So we see fear arising as a result of the fact when, and you remember the statistics and things that have been stated over the years, Attorney Lee, regarding the workplace, for example. there were predictions that by the year, and the year kept changing, right? It continues to change, that by the year 2030, that the majority, corporate workplace would be women and people of color. And so that raised a lot of fear in the dominant corporate leadership, that they would be losing ground. And so what we see over a period of this time, and I wonder, where is the Black think tank? And I know there are Black think tanks out there, needs to come together around a strategy as to how to address these attacks on diversity and inclusion. And litigation at this point may not be the best strategy, because when we look at, the affirmative action case, right? Oh, I'm sorry. The opinion impacting Harvard, in that case right now only applies to universities and colleges. But we're seeing law firms getting letters, Attorney Lee, telling them that they must dissolve their diversity programs. We're seeing the Fearless Fund, which is a group of African-American women who are attempting to enable themselves by investing in African-American women, being the subject of a lawsuit. So we need a unified strategy of all the best and brightest in our country to come together around how we're going to address this particular issue. And I'll stop there for callers' comments.
That's a brilliant analysis. And let me tell you why that's important, particularly our audience. Last fall, in about 3.5 months in Indianapolis, we had 18 African Americans shot and killed by police officers. Where was the community outrage to these? I didn't see the majority, but I saw several of the cases. There were 2 cases that I saw that was outright murder by the police department. And we're going to prove it in court. But the thing that bothers me is that we have somehow loosened focus of these issues that shaped and affects our daily life. Like, for example, you had Dexter Reed in Chicago, shot about 100 times, almost 100 times there. And I looked at the videotape, counselor, of the shooting. They approached his car, they had on civilian clothing, they pointed a gun at the guy's face. So instead of approaching for a traffic shot, they approached him like they were getting ready to blow his brains out. And that troubled me, because now they're saying they have this qualified immunity, and it's not whether or not the force was excessive, but the question is whether or not it was necessary in the first place. Why in the hell they thought it was necessary to point a gun at somebody's head while you're in civilian clothing? With the gang violence and stuff, the motorist could have reasonably thought that he's been attacked by some gangbangers. If you have they should have a law there in Chicago and place like that police officers should not be able to pull people over for traffic stop unless they have in a police car, a marked police car. Because we've had phony police stops and things like that. So that case bothered me, and most people, our callers, they're talking about these other issues, but this is an important issue. This is something that affects us every time we walk out our door in our respective neighborhoods. We're at risk. If you have police officers out of control that could indiscriminately point a gun at you in civilian clothing, Attorney Banks, I just think it's wrong.
Attorney Lee, last week, the video cam was released showing the fatal shooting of Dexter Reed, 26 years old. He shot 96 times in 41 seconds after a traffic stop for allegedly no seatbelt. Now, query one, how could the officers see that he had no seatbelts? And as you stated, these are 5 plainclothes tactical police officers. They're in an unmarked car. They pulled him over allegedly for a seatbelt violation. And again, it's unclear how they could have seen that he was not wearing a seatbelt. From what I understand so far, based on what I've read, and this matter, of course, is being investigated, we've got Chicago, as you know, is operating under a consent decree. It's over 228 pages, and I had an opportunity to review it last evening, and it addresses issues such as use of force, and dealing with young people, and accountability and training, and all of these things. But we're still seeing these types of shootings occur in Chicago and across this nation on a day-to-day basis. Now, the Civilian Office of Accountability and an independent expert, they stated that it appears that Dexter Reed fired first in a shootout that resulted in his death, that he initially, shot and wounded another police officer. But query Attorney Lee, you've handled many of these cases, and I want, of course, Attorney Grimes' opinion on this as well. Was the stop pretextual in the first place? Why was he even stopped? And because of the distrust that many members of our communities have with the police, is it possible, to your point, that he feared for his life because he didn't know who was confronting him at the time? But I would imagine that police officers, wouldn't they have to identify themselves? From what I see, it says that they approached his car, they asked him to roll down the window and unlock the door. This is what's being reported initially. And that after those verbal commands, that he fired toward the passenger side of the vehicle and shot one of the officers. And then he drove his vehicle into a car that was seated in front of him, after which he exited the vehicle and began to flee, leaving the gun on the front seat. So the question becomes, what is reasonable after the stop? Okay, but the first question becomes, was the stop legal? That's number one. And number two, after the stop, what is reasonable, necessary, and proportionate use of force? One officer shot 50 rounds and 3 rounds after Mr. Reed was laying motionless on the ground.
It's terrible tragedy that we see occurring on a regular basis in our cities and towns in America. Unfortunately, it's like an open target on these African-American male motorists. And so a lot of people don't understand how significant a problem this is. The video that I saw, they approached the car pointing the gun at the guy's head. Unless I'm looking at something wrong, I'm thinking, if you approach a person and point a gun at them, and you're wearing civilian clothing, you have a jacket on and thing, you don't show anything to show you even a police officer, what do you think? Logically, you could reasonably think that you've been robbed by gangbangers. And so the whole thing to me is not whether or not the force was justifiable use of deadly force. The question is whether or not it was necessary in the first place. Why are you pulling somebody over, pointing a gun at them in civilian clothing? That's something that the mayor of that city needs to correct immediately in Chicago, because I had a case that I did. Unfortunately, what I learned is that the police officers in Chicago, they were all chronic liars. Luckily, where we get part of the matters captured on videotape, they conceal witnesses, the critical witnesses, they sent out of the country. And so they don't play fair. The cops themselves, I thought, were a bunch of criminals, and that's what I characterize them as. And so my problem with this is that this use of force, of deadly force, a lot of times is protected by qualified immunity. But the question that the community must answer and hold these people accountable is this use of force necessary? Is it reasonable and necessary based upon the circumstances that led to the stop in the first place? Is it reasonable and necessary to confront the person with your gun pointed at him? Is it reasonable and necessary to do all these actions and then claim you're protected by qualified immunity? And
that is so true, Attorney Lee. There are lots of problems with qualified immunity, and you have been at the forefront of that issue. And I also wanted to point out that with respect to, it's my understanding as well, that at least one of these police officers, if not more, are being investigated for other stops for allegedly not wearing a seatbelt. And so again, the question becomes, are these stops pretextual? And we know that African-American men and men of color are stopped at a disproportionately higher rate than others individuals.
wow, there are a lot of other issues that we didn't get to talk about today. But folks, remember, the show is called Legal Issues of Today. And we can't cover every international event worldwide. I know we went off the rails a little bit today, talk about Israeli-Palestine, but we're dealing with American laws and American legal issues for the most part, and that's the focus of this show. There are so many legal issues that affect our daily life, and we're trying to cover the major one, particularly major things that affect our communities. Any closing comment, Attorney Banks?
This is why voting is so very important when we look at issues like the attack on diversity and inclusion. It's very important to vote, not only in the national elections, but in your state and local elections as well. It's important to know who your police chiefs are and who is the head of your school system, your school districts, your superintendent of schools, and all the way up and down the ballot. Voting is critical because it impacts and has a direct link to other issues impacting our communities, from education to housing to healthcare to social justice. And so this is why voting is so very important.
Well, thank you so much for those excellent comments about voting. One final thought. We have these negative commercials in Indiana, and there's a blatant racist. The candidate running for governor, they each trying to run these commercials that appeal to white supremacist type audience. It's insulting, quite frankly. But in any event, thank you for calling in today. Thank you for listening to our show. And next week, we'll be talking about legal issues of today. Thank you, everyone, and have a happy and productive day. Take care.
God bless everyone. Thank you.